The world sees only what it wishes, never what truly is. Clara stepped onto the platform, the coarse wood rough beneath her boots. The wind tugged at her skirts and her dark hair, whipping it across her face. She felt the eyes before she heard the laughter, a wave of judgment washing over her chest, pressing her heart flat. Every pair of eyes seemed sharpened with ridicule. The groom waited at the far edge of the station, his boots striking the planks with precise, deliberate cadence. He studied her for a long moment, lips tightening. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, "Not what I expected." The words struck her like stones. She tried to lift her chin, but the heat in her cheeks betrayed her shame. Her hands clutched the folds of her skirt. The laughter in the crowd intensified, rolling around her like a tide. A man at the edge of the platform snorted and nudged his neighbor. "Did they make a mistake? That's the bride." Another voice, sharp and cruel, "Who'd marry her?" Clara's throat tightened. Every step she tried to take toward the groom felt like dragging herself through quicksand. She lowered her gaze, wishing the earth would swallow her whole, but the crowd would not allow it. They saw her, they mocked her. Her eyes landed on a corner near the station fence. A child, small and unassuming, watched her silently. The boy's eyes were wide and curious, not cruel. He smiled faintly, a gentle, fleeting expression that held no judgment. Clara's heart skipped. It was such a small gesture, yet it struck her more deeply than the jeers around her. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat. The world's laughter was deafening, yet in that moment, the child's smile felt like a single note of music cutting through a storm. She whispered to herself, voice trembling, I will survive this." The groom straightened, his shadow falling long across the platform. He didn't speak again, but the disappointment in his eyes weighed heavily, pressing her down. Clara's lips curved into a tentative smile, fragile and untested, more a shield than an expression. Every muscle in her body screamed with tension. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, the tears threatening to spill. But she held them back, drawing in a shaky breath, letting the wind scatter the edges of her humiliation. The train whistle blew, piercing the tension, announcing departure. Clara's gaze flicked back to the crowd, their laughter still ringing, sharp and merciless. She stepped away from them, toward the waiting wagon. Each step was deliberate, a tiny act of rebellion against the shame pressing from all sides. The wagon's wheels creaked under the weight of the unknown. Clara's hands found the edge of the seat, gripping for support. She glanced back once more. The crowd had not softened. They had not faltered. But the child's small nod remained, a beacon of quiet hope in the midst of scorn. She inhaled the dusty air, letting it fill her lungs. The wind tugged again at her hair and skirts, but this time it felt different, as if it were carrying her forward, away from judgment and into something unknown. Her voice rose softly, barely above the rush of wind. I don't know where I'm going, but I'll find my way." The wagon jolted, moving slowly, carrying her from one world into another. The train station, the whispers, the laughter, all of it faded in the distance. The plain stretched ahead, wide and unforgiving, yet strangely free. Clara's heart was heavy, but the spark of that small, unjudging smile lingered. It was fragile, yes, but alive. A quiet defiance stirred within her chest. She would endure, she must endure, and somewhere in the vast horizon ahead, perhaps a life awaited that saw her for what she truly was, not for what the world demanded she be. The sun began to sink, brushing the sky with bruised purples and deep gold. Clara's eyes followed the horizon. Every mile the wagon carried her, she felt the weight of shame lessen, replaced by something that had never truly existed in her life before, a hint of hope. And in that fragile, trembling heartbeat, she realized she was leaving more than a place. She was leaving fear behind, step by trembling step. The wagon jolted over the uneven track, carrying Clara further from the station and deeper into uncertainty. Dust rose in faint clouds around the wheels, coating her hands and cheeks with grit, but she barely noticed. Her mind replayed the scorn, the whispers, the eyes that had measured and condemned her before she could even breathe. She drew the blanket tighter around her shoulders, feeling the coarse fabric against her skin. The chill of evening cut through, yet the warmth of the child's smile lingered, an ember refusing to die. Clara's eyes wandered to the horizon, where the sky stretched wide, painted with streaks of orange and violet. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine something different, a place where her weight did not invite ridicule, where she could exist without apology, where her heart could breathe without the constant ache of judgment. The wagon swayed, and she gripped the sides to steady herself. Her stomach churned with a mix of fear and anticipation. What awaited her? A cold reception, a life of endless servitude, or perhaps, though her mind hesitated to admit it, a chance to prove herself beyond the narrow eyes of strangers. The groom sat stiffly across from her, hands folded in his lap, eyes cast downward as if avoiding the undeniable truth he could not articulate. Disappointment did not belong to her alone. Clara dared a glance at him. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. She offered no words, no defense. None were needed. She felt the weight of his gaze and let it settle like a stone in her chest. For hours, the wagon carried her through barren plains, the landscape harsh and unyielding. The wind sighed through the sparse trees and over the rocky earth. Occasionally, the sound of a distant animal or the creak of the wagon reminded her that the world moved on, indifferent to her pain. At one point, she closed her eyes and listened. She could hear her own breathing, the horse's hooves, the whisper of wheels against rutted tracks, and underneath it all, a quiet, insistent rhythm, the heartbeat of possibility. A thin veil of moonlight fell over the wagon. Clara's reflection shimmered faintly in the polished wood of a side panel. She hardly recognized herself dear, streaked, hair unkempt, skirts dust-stained. But in those eyes, she saw endurance staring back. She whispered, "I will not break, not here, not now." The night deepened, stars scattered like fragile sparks overhead. Clara thought of the child, the one small witness who had seen her not as a spectacle but as a person. That memory offered a strange kind of courage, fragile but undeniable. A sudden gust rattled the wagon. Clara shivered, but it was not entirely from the cold. Her mind drifted to what lay ahead, the life she had been thrust into, the strangers who awaited her arrival. Yet somewhere in the dark, she felt the first flicker of her own agency, a subtle defiance against the world that had tried to define her by size, by appearance, by expectation. Hours passed. The silence of the plains pressed in, heavy and unyielding, yet comforting in its constancy. Clara's thoughts wandered, examining herself in ways no one had dared before. She remembered her mother's gentle hand on her cheek, the laughter of friends long gone, and the few moments in life when she had felt seen without judgment. She took a steadying breath, letting the air fill her lungs fully, deliberately. The wagon rolled on, and she allowed herself one small, tentative hope. Perhaps this journey, forced upon her by circumstance and cruelty, could become the first step toward a life claimed by her own will. At last the faint lights of the ranch appeared in the distance. Clara's heart quickened, a blend of anxiety and cautious anticipation. She did not know what awaited, cold indifference, hostility, or something altogether unexpected, but she braced herself, ready to face it. Her gaze lingered once more on the open plains, the horizon wide and unbroken. For the first time, the future felt like a canvas rather than a cage. And in that quiet moment, Clara made a silent promise to herself. She would endure, she would persist, and somehow, she would rise beyond the laughter and the scorn that had marked her at the station. The wagon's wheels groaned as they rolled closer. Clara straightened, gripping the edges, her reflection steady in the polished wood once more. She lifted her chin, her gaze forward, heart clenched but unyielding. Somewhere ahead, her fate waited, but it would not define her alone. The night deepened further, and the plains whispered their secrets. Clara leaned back against the rough wood, allowing the motion of the wagon and the rhythm of her heartbeat to guide her forward. One step at a time, 1 mile at a time, she moved toward a destiny she had not chosen, but one she might yet claim. The wagon rolled steadily across the barren plains, dust rising in lazy swirls around its wheels. Clara's hands gripped the edges, knuckles pale, her body sore from hours of sitting and the lingering tension of humiliation. The wind tugged at her hair and skirts, carrying with it the scent of dry earth, wild grass, and distant pine. Her eyes followed the horizon, unbroken and vast, where the sky touched the land in a seamless line of gold and violet. Each mile felt like a measured test of endurance, her own heart beating in time with the wagon's slow rhythm. She glanced at the groom, sitting rigid across from her, eyes fixed on the dust-choked plains. There was silence between them, heavy and awkward, a chasm built of unspoken disappointment. Clara swallowed and focused forward, letting the sun's warmth brush her cheeks and chasing away the memory of the station's laughter. The first few hours were quiet, save for the creak of the wheels and the snort of the horses. Clara's thoughts drifted inward, examining the raw ache of her humiliation, the sting of every word and glance she had endured. Yet beneath the shame, a strange curiosity had begun to stir. What lay ahead? What life awaited her in the unknown ranchlands? As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the landscape began to change. Rocky outcrops gave way to rolling hills, scrub grass bending in the wind. Clara noticed the subtle signs of habitations, smoke curling from chimneys far in the distance, the faint glint of sunlight on tin roofs. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a life awaited, indifferent yet alive, and she felt her pulse quicken with both trepidation and a quiet thrill. The wagon slowed as the trail curved toward a cluster of buildings. A man emerged from the ranch gates, broad, shouldered and tall, boots kicking up dust as he approached. His face was weathered, sharp lines etched by wind and sun, and yet his eyes carried a strange calm, a depth that seemed to measure everything and say nothing. Ethan. Clara had heard the name whispered along the route, tales of a man feared and respected in equal measure. Some spoke of him with reverence, others with caution, but all agreed on one truth. He was a man who expected strength in those around him. Clara felt her chest tighten. She was neither strong nor confident, not yet. And yet, something about the man's presence compelled her to stand a little taller, to hold her gaze a fraction longer. The wagon creaked to a stop. Horses snorted and stamped, tails flicking, ears twitching to the rancher's presence. Clara's hands rested lightly on her lap, breath shallow but steadying. Ethan approached slowly, surveying her with cool detachment. There was no warmth in his initial glance, only the weight of silent judgment. "You're Clara," he said finally, voice low, steady. "Yes," she replied softly, barely more than a whisper, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. He nodded once, brief, almost imperceptible, then turned his attention to the horses, checking their harnesses and reins. Clara followed his movements with cautious curiosity. Every motion he made spoke of familiarity and authority, a command over this land that she could barely comprehend. For a long moment, there was no conversation. Only the sounds of the plains, the creak of wood, the snort of animals, the wind whispering through sparse grass. Clara shifted slightly, letting her hands brush against the blanket it draped across her shoulders. She felt the tension in her muscles ease, imperceptibly, as if the quiet rhythm of this new place offered a small measure of solace. Ethan finally glanced her way again. his gaze lingering just long enough to notice the traces of tears on her cheeks, the slump of her shoulders, the subtle tremor in her hands. But he said nothing, offering no words of comfort, no soft smile, only a measured presence that demanded she stand steady under scrutiny. Clara straightened, drawing in a deep breath. She could feel the first flicker of awareness. Perhaps here, even in the indifference, there was a chance to be measured not by the world's cruelty, but by something different, something earned quietly, day by day. She watched as Ethan moved to the barn, his steps deliberate, every motion confident and precise. The faint jingle of harnesses and the muted clatter of tools were the first sounds of life she could almost belong to, if she learned the rhythm. As the wagon waited, Clara let her eyes wander across the ranch. The house stood silent but solid, chimneys dark against the sky, windows catching the last rays of the sun. Somewhere inside, warmth awaited, even if it did not yet acknowledge her presence. Clara exhaled slowly, shoulders loosening. For the first time since the train station, she allowed herself to imagine that this place, rugged, harsh, and vast, might offer something she had never known, space to exist without immediate ridicule, room to grow, and perhaps a glimpse of safety in a world that had so often been cruel. Her gaze fell again to the distant barn. Horses nickered softly, the wind lifted dust in lazy spirals, and the faint scent of hay reached her. Somewhere in the quiet, the rhythm of the ranch whispered a promise. Endurance could be rewarded. Strength, even hidden and uncertain, might find recognition. Clara's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, fragile but real. She adjusted her blanket over her shoulders, taking a small, deliberate step toward what would be her first real challenge in this new life, proving, to herself and the world, that she belonged. The sun dipped lower behind the hills, casting long shadows over the plains. Clara's eyes followed them, tracing the line where earth met sky, where uncertainty met possibility, and in that quiet, golden hour she realized the journey had only just begun. The wagon rolled to a gentle stop beside the wide, weathered gate of the ranch. Dust settled in lazy clouds around Clara's skirts, and the faint smell of earth and hay filled her lungs. She let the blanket slip from her shoulders, revealing arms stiff from the journey and hands raw from gripping the wagon's edges. Ethan stood silently, a figure carved from wind and sun, watching her with an unreadable gaze. He did not speak immediately, only measured her, as if testing the air between them for honesty, resilience, or weakness. Clara swallowed. Every instinct told her to shrink away, to hide from this man who carried the authority of the plains in his very stance. Yet another part of her, the stubborn ember of survival, forced her to stand tall, however uncertainly. "Step down carefully," Ethan said at last, voice even, low, controlled. The ground's uneven. Her boots met the rough earth, and she braced herself against the wagon for balance. Every muscle protested, but she held steady. The wind tugged at her hair, now streaked with dust and sweat, and the horses shuffled impatiently nearby, their hooves kicking small clouds of dirt. Clara allowed her eyes to wander across the ranch yard. There were horses in pens, their tails swishing, ears twitching. Chickens clucked softly near a fenced coop. Beyond, a sturdy house loomed, windows darkened by the setting sun, chimneys unlit but solid against the sky. Somewhere within those walls awaited warmth she had never yet experienced, though she could not know what form it might take. Ethan gestured toward the barn. "Bring the supplies inside, then see to the animals." Clara nodded, hands trembling slightly. She moved toward the wagon, lifting sacks of feed, her body straining under the unfamiliar weight. Sweat pricked her brow, and the muscles in her arms and back protested, but she persisted. Every motion was deliberate, every step a small assertion of her presence in this new world. The horses watched her, their dark eyes unblinking, as if assessing her worth, just as Ethan had. Clara's heart thudded in her chest, not entirely from fatigue. There was an unspoken test here, one she had not been aware she would face, proving, quietly and without argument, that she could endure, that she could adapt. By the time the sun dipped fully below the hills, Clara had arranged the feed, refilled the water troughs, and brushed down the horses' coats. Her hands were streaked with dust, sweat, and the faint scent of hay, but she felt a strange satisfaction. Even in silence, the land had begun to acknowledge her effort. Ethan watched from the barn's threshold. He did not speak, did not offer praise, and yet the slight nod he gave her as she finished the tasks was enough. It was the first acknowledgement that she was more than the scornful judgment of strangers or the harshness of the station's crowd. As evening settled, the wind softened, and the ranch yard grew quiet. Clara moved toward the house, unsure whether warmth awaited or cold indifference. Each step was measured, steady, and deliberate. The door creaked under her hand as she pushed it open, revealing a dim interior. The faint scent of wood smoke and cooked meals hinted at lives lived within, routines established, and the possibility of belonging she had never known. The children of the ranch emerged slowly from shadows, curious eyes watching her. Their expressions held no malice, only wonder. One small girl stepped forward, braids bouncing, and tilted her head slightly. "Are you the new helper?" she asked quietly. Clara's lips curved into a small, tentative smile. "Yes," she replied softly, voice careful, measured. The children's faces brightened, subtle warmth softening the edges of the long, hard day. For the first time since the station, Clara felt a flicker of connection. It was fragile, yes, but undeniably there. Ethan's silhouette remained in the doorway, shadowed and silent. Yet his gaze lingered longer than necessary, as if noting not only her effort, but the subtle resilience that had carried her through humiliation, through fear, and now into this tentative new space. Clara hung the blanket by the fireplace and moved to sit near the hearth. The fire crackled faintly as a log settled, and the room's warmth began to seep into her bones. The sound of children's laughter, quiet at first, then growing, filled the space, a stark contrast to the laughter that had mocked her hours ago at the station. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the rhythm of the home, the gentle movement of life around her, and the distant presence of Ethan's watchful gaze settle over her. For the first time since she had been forced from the station, she allowed herself to imagine that perhaps this place, rugged, vast, and challenging, might become something more than a trial. Perhaps it could become safety, and maybe even belonging. Clara's thoughts drifted to the horizon again, the same unbroken line of sky and earth. Somewhere beyond those walls and fields, the world had judged her. Here, however, the judgment was paused, deferred, and replaced with quiet observation. She exhaled slowly, letting her breath carry away the tension in her shoulders. The night grew deeper. Outside, the wind whispered through the plains. The horses settled in their stalls, and the faint glow of the moon touched the house's weathered wood. Clara's hands rested lightly on her lap. She felt the weight of the day and the lingering ache of her journey, yet beneath it all, a quiet ember of hope glowed, subtle but unyielding. And in that stillness, Clara understood something new. She was no longer only a victim of circumstance. Here in this place, she could begin to forge a path for herself, step by cautious step, under the watchful eyes of a man whose measure of her had yet to be given, but whose presence promised challenge, and perhaps something more. The house stood quiet, its timbers groaning softly under the evening wind. Clara stepped inside, the faint scent of wood smoke and baked bread wrapping around her like an unspoken welcome. Her boots scuffed against the worn floorboards as she took her first careful steps into this new world. Ethan's shadow fell across the doorway, silent and watchful. He did not speak, merely observed, as she adjusted to the rhythm of the household. Clara drew a slow breath, letting it carry away the last remnants of her fear, the dust and shame of the station, and the weight of a world that had judged her before she could speak. The children peered from behind a corner, curious, cautious. A boy, small and wiry with wide brown eyes, stepped forward first. "You work here now?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Clara smiled faintly, a mixture of hesitation and gentle courage. "Yes," she replied softly. "I'll do my best." The boy tilted his head, studying her, then offered a shy nod. The girl with braided hair mirrored the gesture. Their eyes held no judgment, only interest, a small mercy that warmed Clara's chest. The next morning arrived with the low hum of life on the ranch. Clara rose with the sun, the air crisp, carrying the scent of dew on grass and the faint metallic tang of the animals' pens. She moved with care, learning the routines that had long been second nature to the household, fetching water, tending the animals, sweeping dust from the boards, and arranging hay for the horses. Each task was new, each motion a test of endurance. Clara's body ached in places it had not known could ache, but with every chore completed, a subtle pride began to take root. The once embarrassed girl who had trembled at the station was becoming a woman capable of quiet competence. Ethan watched from the shadows of the barn, his gaze steady, assessing. He did not offer praise, yet his silence spoke more than words. Each motion of Clara's hands, the care in her eyes as she brushed down the horses' coats, the gentle touch when gathering the chickens, all of it hinted at a determination he had not expected, and respect, even unspoken, began to settle like dust in the corners of his mind. By midday, the sun hung high and bright, scattering warmth across the plains. Clara paused to wipe her brow, glancing around at the ranch, at the animals, at the children who now followed her quietly, learning her routines by observation. She felt an unfamiliar sensation, a sense of belonging, tentative but real, growing steadily with each completed task. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves outside, carrying with it the distant laughter of the children as they attempted to mimic her movements, stacking hay bales or feeding the chickens in uneven lines. Clara smiled, soft and unguarded, her own laughter joining theirs, fragile but sincere. Later, she entered the kitchen, the warmth of the hearth embracing her. The smell of stew and fresh bread made her stomach rumble. She moved to prepare the meal, setting pots and stirring carefully, mindful of the household's rhythms. The children hovered, hands clasped, eyes bright with curiosity. Ethan emerged briefly, observing silently, then returned to his work outside. Clara noticed the subtle shift. His watchful presence was no longer indifferent, but carried a measure of recognition. It was a quiet acknowledgement, subtle yet significant, that she was not merely a guest or an intruder, but someone who could navigate this rugged world. As the afternoon waned, the sun slanted low through the windows, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Clara sat on a bench, her hands resting lightly in her lap. She let herself breathe fully, listening to the creak of the house, the whisper of wind through the trees, the soft murmur of the children's voices. The day had been long, filled with labor that tested her body and patience. Yet as she looked around, she felt the first real sense of accomplishment, of quiet pride. Each small success, each task completed without error, without derision, was a tiny victory, a reclaiming of dignity she had almost forgotten she possessed. Clara rose, moving to check on the animals once more before night fell. The horses nickered, the chickens clucked softly, and the distant hills were bathed in the golden light of sunset. She spoke softly, a whisper more to herself than anyone else. "I can do this. I will find my place here." The house, once imposing and silent, now felt alive. The walls held no judgment, the shadows no malice. For the first time since the station, Clara felt a subtle warmth, not of affection yet, but of potential, of a life that could be carved through patience, endurance, and quiet courage. And as the evening deepened, the stars beginning to prick the sky with soft points of light, Clara understood that the silent house was not merely shelter. It was a stage for transformation, a place where the world could no longer define her entirely, and where she could begin to shape her own destiny, one careful step at a time. Night settled over the ranch, soft and heavy, as Clara moved quietly through the dim interior of the house. The glow from the hearth flickered against the walls, casting dancing shadows that made the familiar seem strange and alive. Her hands, still dust, streaked from the day, rested on the table as she adjusted pots and tidied what she could. The children lingered nearby, silent now, their curiosity giving way to the comfort of routine. The boy who had questioned her arrival leaned against the doorway. "Why? Died? Will you? Stay?" he asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. Clara's heart tugged at the question. She bent slightly to meet his gaze, voice gentle, careful. "I'm here for now," she whispered, "and I'll do my best to help." The girl with braids stepped closer, a quiet smile touching her lips. "I like it when you feed the chickens," she said, her words fragile, earnest. Clara's smile deepened, warming from a flicker into something more tangible. "I like it too," she admitted, voice soft, "they're funny in their own way." Outside, the wind sighed across the plains. A distant coyote's call punctuated the stillness, echoing against the hills. Clara listened for a moment, letting the sounds anchor her, reminding her that the world was vast, harsh, and indifferent, but also alive. She moved to check on the animals one final time before night fully claimed the sky. The horses nickered quietly, tails flicking, eyes alert in the moonlight. Clara ran her hands down the nearest horse's mane, feeling the warmth beneath her fingers. She whispered to it, almost to herself, "We'll get through this. Together." Ethan emerged from the barn, boots soft against the earth. He paused at the edge of the yard, silent, and watched her. There was no praise in his expression, no overt acknowledgement. Only observation, and perhaps something else, recognition, subtle and weighty, of her steady endurance. "You're stronger than you look," he said finally, voice low, measured. Clara froze for a heartbeat, then allowed herself a small nod. "I have to be," she replied, barely louder than the wind that brushed past them. He offered no reply, only a brief glance, then turned back to the barn, leaving Clara alone with the quiet of the night. And yet she did not feel lonely. There was a strange comfort in the understanding that strength could exist quietly, without ceremony, without fanfare, and still be noticed. The children yawned, one by one retreating to their beds, leaving Clara in the soft glow of the hearth. She moved to a chair near the fire, letting her body sink into it, feeling the aches of the day and the subtle satisfaction of survival. She closed her eyes briefly, imagining the hours, the routines, the small tasks completed. Each one was a testament to her resilience, to a courage she had almost forgotten she possessed. A soft sigh escaped her lips as the night deepened. The stars above the plains gleamed cold and distant, yet somehow comforting. In that vast silence, Clara allowed herself a quiet thought. Perhaps this house, this silent, observing home, was the beginning of something new. Something that could teach her not only endurance, but connection. Not only labor, but quiet pride. Her gaze drifted toward the far corner of the room, where shadows mingled with firelight. She imagined the children asleep, dreaming, and felt a spark of warmth. A sense of purpose bloomed subtly in her chest, a fragile, promising thing. For the first time she felt it, the possibility of being valued, of being seen beyond the harsh eyes of strangers, beyond the scorn and ridicule that had marked her for so long. Here, even in silence, she could carve a space for herself. The house, once imposing and alien, had begun to soften in her perception. Its creaks and groans were no longer menacing but alive, breathing alongside her, and somewhere in the quiet, Clara realized she was beginning to belong. Not fully, not yet, but enough to take the next step forward. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the day lift just slightly. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring new tasks, new trials. But tonight, she allowed herself to rest, knowing that even in labor and silence, she had earned a measure of respect, from the land, from the animals, from the children, and perhaps even from Ethan, in ways unspoken. And as the fire crackled softly, shadows stretching long and fluid across the floorboards, Clara whispered to the night, voice trembling but steady, "I can do this. I will belong here. I have to." The wind carried her words outward, across the plains, where the silent house listened, absorbing her resolve. Somewhere in the darkness, a promise lingered. Endurance would not go unnoticed, and heart, even hardened ones, could be softened. The morning sun seeped through the gaps in the wooden shutters, spilling light across the kitchen floor. Clara stirred awake, the warmth of the day touching her face before she had even opened her eyes. The house, once silent and imposing, now carried a familiar rhythm. The creak of boards, the soft rustle of chores beginning, the low murmur of children talking quietly. Clara moved to the kitchen, the scent of fresh bread and simmering stew greeting her before she had even entered. She paused, inhaling deeply, letting the aroma anchor her to this place, to this life slowly becoming her own. The children were already at the table, fidgeting with small wooden toys and giggling softly. Their laughter, fragile at first, had become a melody she welcomed, a sound that soothed the ache left from her days of rejection. "Good morning," she said, voice soft, careful. "Morning," the boy replied, his tone bright. The girl with the braids added a shy wave. Clara smiled, moving to arrange the breakfast. She poured warm milk, set bowls of porridge, and noticed the subtle ways Ethan moved about the kitchen. Silent, efficient, present. His eyes met hers briefly, not with command, but with a subtle acknowledgement that she was here, part of this household, part of the life that stretched across the plains. As the morning progressed, Clara taught the children small tasks. She showed them how to knead bread properly, the rhythm of rolling dough under fingers dusted with flour. The boy struggled, laughter escaping him as the dough clung stubbornly to his palms. "You're doing it wrong," he exclaimed, frustrated. Clara crouched beside him, voice gentle. "No, just like this. Feel it, let it guide you." Her hands brushed his briefly as she guided the motion. The boy's frown softened, and slowly, clumsily, the dough began to take shape. Ethan lingered nearby, leaning against the doorway, silent. Clara sensed his gaze, not intrusive, but measure, watching not only the children, but her, the way her hands moved, the patience in her voice. She felt an unfamiliar warmth, subtle but undeniable, that came not from admiration alone, but from recognition. Later, the children scampered outside, chasing the chickens and calling to one another. Clara stepped to the porch, letting the sun warm her face. Ethan approached slowly, boots crunching against the earth. "You've settled in quickly," he said, voice low, careful. Clara tilted her head, a faint smile brushing her lips. "I have to," she replied. "There's too much at stake to linger in doubt." He nodded, eyes softening for a heartbeat. "You've got patience and endurance. Not everyone does." The afternoon brought more quiet labor. Clara tended the garden, checking rows of vegetables, pulling weeds, and humming softly under her breath. The children joined her at intervals, hands in the dirt, their small chatter mingling with hers. Each gesture was simple, yet profound, an unspoken connection forming between them, a fragile trust that did not demand words. Ethan appeared occasionally, watching without interference, noting the subtle ways Clara carried herself. He observed the care she took with the children, the attentiveness in her movements, the gentle authority that required no command, and for the first time he allowed himself a trace of curiosity, an interest that was not born of duty, but of respect, quiet and compelling. By evening, the sun dipped low over the plains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Clara returned to the house carrying baskets of vegetables. She placed them carefully on the counter, brushing her hands against her skirts, lingering for a moment by the hearth. The children bounded in after her, eager to show small treasures they had found outside: feathers, stones, and a tiny sprig of wildflowers. Clara knelt, eyes bright, lifting the girl's hand to examine the delicate bloom. "You found something beautiful," she whispered. The girl smiled, shy but radiant. "You like it?" Clara nodded, holding the sprig close to her heart. "I do, very much." From across the room, Ethan watched silent, the corners of his mouth almost imperceptibly softening. Clara sensed his presence, but no words passed between them. Only glances, small and loaded with meaning, their significance subtle but unmistakable. As night fell, the house quieted again, but the warmth lingered. Clara moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit plains. She felt a new awareness of belonging, of connection, of hearts opening slowly, cautiously, in response to shared labor, shared care, and shared presence. And in that quiet, she realized something extraordinary. The house, once silent and intimidating, had begun to feel like home, not fully, not yet, but enough that the possibility of trust, and perhaps something more, could take root in her heart. Night draped over the plains, soft and quiet, as Clara moved through the house, the dim light of the hearth casting gentle shadows across the walls. The day's labor had left her hands rough, her arms tired, but a quiet satisfaction lingered in her chest, a warmth unfamiliar and welcome. The children were already asleep, tucked into their beds, the slow rhythm of their breathing filling the room with innocence. Clara lingered in the doorway, watching them for a moment. She traced a finger along the edge of the bed, whispering softly, "Sleep well. Tomorrow will be another day." Ethan appeared in the doorway silently, boots whispering against the floor. Clara turned slightly, surprised, but did not retreat. "You do well by them," he said, voice low, steady. Clara's lips curved into a faint, tired smile. "They teach me more than I teach them," she admitted. He nodded, stepping closer, the room thick with unspoken understanding. "You've got a way with them, and a way with this house." Clara felt a warmth at his words that went beyond acknowledgement. She glanced toward the hearth, then back to him. "I never imagined I'd find any place where I could belong," she whispered. Ethan's eyes softened. "Belonging is earned," he said, almost more to himself than to her, "and you've earned a piece of it." The night carried a gentle hush, only the wind brushing against the windows, the faint call of distant animals across the plains. Clara moved toward the kitchen to set a few things in order. She paused, noticing the way Ethan lingered near the doorway, silent yet present, like a guardian whose presence was felt even when unspoken. They worked side by side without needing words. She washed dishes, he dried and put them away. Hands occasionally brushed, and each contact sent a quiet shiver through the room, a tension unspoken but palpable. After a while, Ethan leaned against the counter, observing her quietly. "You've changed this place," he said softly, "made it lighter." Clara looked up, eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "I think it's changing me too," she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. The children stirred in their sleep, small murmurs and movements that reminded them all of the fragile innocence Clara had grown to cherish. She knelt beside the girl's bed, brushing a loose braid back over her shoulder. "Good night, little one," she whispered. The boy murmured in his sleep, turning toward her in a subconscious gesture of trust. Clara held her breath for a moment, letting the quiet settle over her. This house, once a place of routine and labor, was becoming something more, something alive with connection, with quiet understanding, with the subtle beginnings of love. Ethan's gaze lingered on her, unguarded for a heartbeat, and Clara sensed a shift. The stoic rancher, the man of few words, had begun to soften in ways he did not yet admit, even to himself, Outside, the plains were bathed in moonlight, silver and vast, stretching beyond the horizon. Clara stepped to the window, resting her hands lightly on the sill. She inhaled the crisp night air, letting it fill her lungs and calm her mind. A quiet resolve settled in her chest. She had endured shame, ridicule, and rejection. She had labored, persisted, and learned the rhythms of this household. And now, slowly, she was discovering the subtle power of trust, of small gestures of patience. The fire crackled softly behind her, the shadows stretching long across the floorboards. Clara allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, a flicker of hope. Perhaps hearts could soften. Perhaps bridges could be built from shared work, laughter, and quiet understanding. Perhaps even she, once scorned and dismissed, could belong, and even inspire belonging in others. Ethan approached quietly, standing near the doorway, and for a long moment they simply looked at one another. Words were unnecessary. The house was alive with the echoes of the day, tasks completed, small victories earned, trust quietly given and received. Clara's lips curved into a small, unguarded smile. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we keep building." Ethan nodded almost imperceptibly. "We do," he agreed, voice low but certain. And as the night deepened, the house held them both, not as strangers, not as guests, but as part of a fragile, growing family. The sky darkened with a sudden heaviness, clouds rolling in like a warning drumbeat across the plains. Clara stood at the edge of the barn, her hands gripping the rough wooden rails as the wind whipped at her skirts. The air smelled of rain and electricity, a tension that prickled along her skin. The children appeared at her side, eyes wide with apprehension. "Is it going to storm?" the boy whispered. Clara crouched to meet his gaze, her voice steady even as her heart pounded. "Yes, but we'll be safe, together." Ethan emerged from the house, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. He surveyed the gathering storm, then the animals, his expression unreadable but determined. "We need to secure the pens. Now," he said, voice firm. Clara nodded, already moving with practiced precision. She ran to the horse stalls, checking gates and tying ropes tight against the coming gale. The children followed, doing what they could, small tasks that kept them safe, guided by Clara's calm instructions. The first drops of rain splashed against the earth, cold and urgent. Clara felt the wind whip around her, tugging at her skirts and hair, but she did not falter. Every chore she had learned, every ounce of strength she had earned over weeks of labor, now mattered more than ever. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the ranch in stark, fleeting brightness. The thunder that followed shook the boards beneath her feet, and for a heartbeat, fear threatened to overtake her. She swallowed it down, forcing her attention back to the tasks at hand. The children clung to her skirts, trusting her entirely. Clara guided them toward the shelter of the barn, her voice cutting through the roar of wind and rain. "Stay close, watch the animals, hold on." Ethan worked alongside her, silent, efficient. He moved quickly, securing fences, reinforcing gates, his presence a steadying force. Yet even his practiced hands could not hide the growing respect in his gaze, watching Clara navigate the chaos with courage and clarity. The storm intensified, rain lashing against wood and tin, turning the dirt paths to thick, sticky mud. Clara waded through it, carrying buckets of water to the parched animals, securing loose hay bales that threatened to blow away. Each motion was a testament to endurance, to the strength she had cultivated quietly over long days. The children watched from the barn, shivering, eyes wide with awe. She's brave," the girl murmured, voice small. "Yes," the boy agreed, gripping the edge of the stall. "She keeps everything together." Clara paused for a moment, catching her breath, as lightning forked across the sky again. The wind, screamed around her, tearing at the barn doors. She glanced at Ethan, whose jaw was tight, his eyes tracking her every move. And for the first time, she saw something unspoken in his expression. Admiration, yes, but deeper than that, recognition. The storm raged on unrelenting, but Clara refused to yield. She moved from animal to animal, checking and rechecking, whispering soft reassurances to frightened horses and clucking to the chickens. Her presence, calm yet commanding, became an anchor in the swirling chaos. Ethan finally approached her as a sudden gust threatened to lift a loose roof panel. Clara moved back. He shouted over the wind. Clara shook her head, determination hard in her eyes. Not yet. I have to make sure they're safe. The panel tore loose anyway, slamming to the ground with a deafening crash. The children gasped, but Clara remained steady. She took a deep breath, assessing the damage, and immediately set to work securing it again. The storm had become a trial by fire, a test of endurance, courage, and quick thinking, and Clara, once the girl who had cowered under ridicule, now faced it head on, unwavering. Lightning illuminated her silhouette against the tumultuous sky, a figure of strength and quiet heroism. Every step, every motion, every decision marked her transformation, from humiliated outcast to someone capable of commanding respect, even in the most unforgiving conditions. As the first hour of the storm passed, the barn and animals were safe, though battered. Clara sank against a post, breath ragged, rain plastering her hair to her face. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the ache in her muscles, the pulse of adrenaline in her veins, and a swelling sense of pride. Ethan approached silently, placing a hand on her shoulder, firm and grounding. "You've done well," he said, voice low but sincere. Clara opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "We did it," she replied, her voice weary but steady. "All of us." Thunder rolled in the distance as the children peeked from the barn door, seeing Clara standing, tall despite the storm's fury. Their eyes reflected awe, admiration, and a budding love that had grown in the shadow of trials. And in that moment, Clara understood something powerful. Courage was not measured by absence of fear, but by the choice to act in spite of it. And in choosing to act, she had begun to earn not just respect, but a sense of belonging that no ridicule could erase. The rain poured on, relentless and fierce, yet inside the barn, there was warmth, resilience, and a new understanding of what it meant to be seen, to be valued, and to be unyielding in the face of life's fiercest storms. The storm raged with relentless force, hammering the ranch with sheets of rain and gusts that bent even the sturdiest of fences. Clara moved through the chaos, mud clinging to her boots, water seeping into her clothes. Her hands were raw, scraped from gripping ropes and latching gates, yet she refused to stop. A sudden cry split the storm, a child's voice, frightened and high-pitched. Clara's heart leapt. She ran toward the sound, the wind threatening to knock her off balance. The boy had slipped near the corral, mud sucking at his feet. She scooped him up, wrapping her arms around him, whispering urgently, "It's okay, I've got you, I've got you." Lightning flashed, illuminating the drenched faces of the children, and for a moment fear etched every feature. Clara's voice cut through the howl of the storm. "Stay close, hold my hand and don't let go." Ethan appeared beside her, hoisting a heavy panel of barn siding against the wind. "Clara, the roof, Floose, we need it secured now." Clara nodded, gripping the boy tightly against her chest. "I'll handle the kids, you handle the structure." Her voice was firm, unyielding. She guided the children to the small shelter under the barn's eaves, mud dripping from their boots, hair plastered to their foreheads. The storm's fury intensified, tearing at fences, tossing loose hay into the air like straw confetti. Clara moved with precision, her every motion deliberate. She secured animals, reinforced gates, whispered encouragement to terrified horses. Her voice carried over the roar of wind. "We can do this. Together, A flash of lightning revealed Ethan struggling against the torn roof, muscles straining. Clara's eyes met his for a brief instant, and in that silent exchange they shared a deep understanding. Survival required courage, ingenuity, and trust. A sudden crash echoed as a fence gave way. Clara bolted, rain stinging her face, to push a frightened horse back into the pen. She spoke softly to it, hands steady despite the wind, easy, calm, "It's okay." The animal shuddered, then obeyed, trusting her steady presence. Hours passed in a blur of mud, rain, and adrenaline. The children huddled close, whispering reassurances to one another, their eyes wide, but filled with awe. Clara's energy did not waver. Even exhaustion could not claim her spirit. Each saved animal, each secured panel, each safe step for the children was a silent victory, proof that courage and action mattered more than fear. Ethan finally came to her side, drenched, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes holding a mix of respect and disbelief. "Clara, you're incredible," he managed, voice strained from effort and wind. Clara, breath ragged, shook her head slightly, eyes still scanning the chaos. "We all are. Everyone does their part," she said, voice low but steady, refusing to let the storm diminish her pride. Lightning split the sky again, thunder shaking the barn, and in that moment, Clara realized she had changed. The girl who once cowered under ridicule had become a force of quiet authority, a protector not only of herself, but of those who depended on her. Her body, once scorned and underestimated, was capable, resilient, heroic. The storm began to abate slowly, rain softening to a persistent drizzle. Clara stood among the pens, soaked, muddy, exhausted, but victorious. The animals were safe, the children were unharmed, and Ethan, standing silently beside her, finally allowed a trace of admiration to break through his stoicism. The children ran to her, voices bright despite the wet and mud. "You saved us," the girl exclaimed. Clara knelt, lifting them gently into her arms, brushing mud from their faces. "We saved each other," she corrected softly, smiling despite her fatigue, "and we'll keep doing it. Together." Ethan watched silent, the tension in his shoulders easing. He finally spoke, voice low, almost vulnerable. "I never doubted you, but now I know you're remarkable." Clara looked up, meeting his gaze. For the first time, she saw not just recognition, but genuine respect, and perhaps the faintest hint of something deeper. Something unspoken, growing quietly amid the chaos. The storm had passed, leaving a damp, glistening world behind. Clara surveyed the plains, now washed clean and silver in the soft moonlight. Her chest heaved with exertion, but her spirit soared. She had faced nature's fury, and emerged not just intact, but honored in ways that ridicule and scorn could never undo. And as she guided the children back to the house, mud, streaked and smiling, Clara felt the truth settle in her heart. Bravery was not a gift of the fortunate. It was earned. It was shown in deeds, in endurance, in standing tall when everything else threatened to fall apart. The morning sun rose over the town, its light harsh and revealing. Clara walked the dusty streets, heart pounding with a mix of dread and resolve. Whispers followed her, cutting sharper than any blade. Faces she once barely dared meet now turned away, or lingered with judgment in their eyes. "You think she's worth anything now," a woman muttered under her breath as Clara passed. Clara's jaw tightened. She did not answer. She had learned long ago that words from those who had never known struggle carried little weight. What mattered was the truth she had earned in action, the courage she had shown, the lives she had protected. The town square was crowded. Merchants rearranged their goods, children clung to parents, and gossip flowed like a river, swift, loud, unforgiving. At the center, a group of townsfolk had gathered, their expressions a mix of curiosity, disdain, and anticipation. They had come to test her again, to see if she could endure scrutiny as she had endured ridicule. Clara stepped forward, shoulders squared. The wind tugged at her skirts, but she ignored it, letting the memory of the storm steel her resolve. Each step toward the crowd was a heartbeat, a declaration. She would not flinch. A man stepped forward, sneering, voice raised to ensure all could hear. You think you've done something, a girl of your shape, your kind, acting as if you matter. Clara felt a familiar sting. Shame threatened, but she held her ground. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice came steady, calm. I acted when it mattered. I saved lives, not for praise, not for recognition, but because it was right. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some whispered, some scoffed, but the words no longer carried the same power. Clara's presence, her courage, was visible now. It could not be ignored. Ethan appeared beside her, silent, steady. His presence was enough to quiet some of the louder voices. When he spoke, it was not to shout, but to declare truth. She's saved more than any of you can claim, and she did it with courage, skill, and heart. The crowd shifted uneasily. Clara took a deep breath, letting her experience, her trials, and her endurance give weight to her next words. I was mocked, I was dismissed, I was humiliated, and yet I chose to act when others faltered. That is who I am. A few townsfolk looked away, shame or awe flickering across their faces. The children she had protected during the storm peeked out from behind onlookers, eyes wide with admiration and pride. Clara's gaze fell on them, and the warmth in her chest grew. You talk of worth. Another man challenged, stepping forward. What proof have we of this? Mere words? Clara's lips curved into a small, confident smile. Proof is not in words, it is in deeds. Look around you, the animals survived, the children are safe, the ranch stands despite the storm. You want proof, witness what I have done. Ethan nodded, standing tall beside her, and I stand with her. Anyone who doubts her courage, her heart, or her value need only look at the truth she has created. A hush fell over the crowd. The air vibrated with a tension that was no longer ridicule, but realization. Clara felt it, a shift in the atmosphere, the first recognition of justice settling over her like a cloak. The whispers grew softer, heads tilted in contemplation. Eyes that had once mocked now searched her, looking not at her size or shape, but at the integrity she had displayed, at the courage she had proven. Clara's heartbeat slowed slightly, the adrenaline of confrontation giving way to quiet pride. She had faced them before in shame and rejection. Today she faced them as herself, resilient, unwavering, honored in her actions. She glanced at Ethan, a subtle smile passing between them. No words were needed. The world was beginning to see her as she truly was, not the girl they had mocked, but a woman of strength, valor, and unassailable dignity. The children ran to her side, small hands clutching hers. You're amazing. The girl whispered, voice filled with awe. Clara knelt, holding them close. We all are, she murmured, letting the weight of trials and triumphs settle in her chest, and we all deserve to be seen for what we truly are. The town square remained tense, but a quiet respect had begun to replace whispers of scorn. Clara felt it ripple through the crowd, the first stirrings of acknowledgement, the dawning of moral justice. The sun climbed higher, casting a stark light over the town square. Clara stood at its center, shoulders straight, hands steady. The crowd had gathered, curiosity thick in the air, but so was the sense of expectation. The knowledge that what was about to unfold would decide more than mere perception. Ethan's presence beside her was a pillar of quiet strength. His eyes never left her, watching, protective, unwavering. Clara drew in a slow breath, feeling the weight of every judgment, every whispered insult, every moment of humiliation she had endured. She lifted her chin, voice clear and steady. I have been mocked for who I am. I have been dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. But today, I stand not as what you expected, but as what I am, a woman who chooses courage over fear, action over passivity, heart over ridicule. The crowd stirred. Some scoffed, some paused, caught in the gravity of her words. A hush fell over the square, as if even the wind held its breath. A town elder stepped forward, frowning. "And you expect us to simply believe you?" Clara's eyes met his, unwavering. "No, I ask you to see what I have done. Look at the lives that were saved. Look at the storm we endured. Look at the children who are safe, the animals unharmed, the ranch standing despite the fury of nature. Proof is not in my words. It is in reality, in action, in truth." Ethan spoke then, voice carrying above the murmurs. "She speaks the truth. Anyone who doubts her courage, her skill, or her heart will find it tested by reality, and she has passed that test." The murmurs shifted from scoffs to uncertain whispers. Faces that had once twisted in mockery now tilted in reflection. Some eyes softened, others lowered, and the weight of their judgments began to shift. Clara felt a deep, steady calm settle over her. She no longer trembled under scrutiny. She had faced storms, literal and metaphorical, and had emerged stronger, undeniable. A woman stepped forward hesitantly. I didn't think, I mean." Her words faltered, replaced by a nod of acknowledgement. Clara's lips curved in a quiet, understanding smile. The children ran to her side, unafraid now, their trust and love tangible. "You did it," the girl exclaimed, voice bright. Clara knelt to meet them at eye level. "We did it," she whispered, brushing mud from their hair. "All of us." The crowd remained, still murmuring, but the tone had shifted. Respect was creeping in, soft at first, like the first light of dawn after a long, dark night. Clara could see it in the eyes of those who had doubted her, recognition, admiration, quiet, begrudging respect. Ethan's gaze met hers, a subtle smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You've earned what words cannot give," he said softly. Clara straightened, looking across the square. The people who had once mocked her now nodded, whispered to one another, acknowledged her courage in their own ways. The moral trial had ended, not with vengeance, not with anger, but with undeniable truth. A gentle breeze stirred, carrying away the last remnants of judgment. Clara inhaled deeply, feeling the air fill her lungs, the sun warming her face. She had faced the world's scorn and stood tall, and in that she had won something far greater, recognition of her true worth. The children clung to her, the small hands gripping her sleeves. "You're our hero," the boy said, voice awed and steady. Clara held them close, letting the words sink in. "And we all have courage inside us," she said softly, eyes shining. "We just have to let it show." Ethan took her hand, a simple gesture, grounding and warm. Together they stood, facing a town that had tried to diminish her, but now could no longer ignore the truth of who she was. The first light of morning spilled across the ranch, soft gold stretching over rolling fields and the sturdy wooden fences that Clara had come to call home. The air was cool, crisp, and calm, a quiet contrast to the chaos and trials that had passed. Clara stepped out of the house, her hands brushing against the worn railing of the porch. Her hair still bore traces of wind and rain from the storms endured, yet there was a serenity in her posture, a gentle confidence she had never known before. The children ran ahead, laughter ringing out as they chased one another through the dew-soaked grass. "Clara, look!" the girl shouted, holding a small bundle of wildflowers she had gathered. Clara smiled, bending down to take the flowers into her hands. "They're beautiful," she whispered, voice soft, touched with warmth. She inhaled their scent, feeling the small joys of life settle into her heart, a balm after so many trials. Ethan appeared behind her, boots crunching softly on the gravel path. He didn't speak at first, merely watching, letting the scene unfold. Then he spoke, low and steady, voice carrying the weight of shared history and quiet admiration. "Mourning suits this place, and you. Clara turned slightly, meeting his gaze. For the first time, there was no tension, no uncertainty, only a calm recognition of what had grown between them, trust, understanding, and something tender that neither had fully named, yet both felt deeply. The children tugged at her sleeves, eyes bright. "Will we go for a ride today?" the boy asked eagerly. Clara chuckled, brushing her fingers through his damp hair. "Yes, we will, but first breakfast." She motioned toward the house, her laughter mingling with theirs, a sound lighter than the wind through the trees. Inside, the aroma of fresh bread and coffee filled the air. Clara moved through the kitchen with a sense of belonging she had never known in the towns she had fled, in the train stations where whispers had followed her, or in the crowd that once mocked her. Here she had found her play, cerned through courage, endurance, and steadfast heart. Ethan set a plate before her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Sit," he said simply. "You've earned it." Clara sat, hands clasped over her lap, feeling the gravity of the moment. The storm had passed, the trial had been faced, and now the quiet triumph of ordinary life awaited. Moments of laughter, of connection, of subtle love that didn't need words to exist. The children climbed onto chairs, settling into breakfast with wide-eyed anticipation. Clara served them, her movements calm, deliberate, and tender. She looked at Ethan across the table, and in that glance they both acknowledged the unspoken. They had endured together, and together they had found a new beginning. Outside, the sun continued to rise, spilling golden warmth over the ranch. Clara's gaze wandered across the fields, the animals grazing peacefully, the fences standing firm. The life she had once feared would crush her now felt like a promise fulfilled. She leaned back in her chair, letting the quiet envelop her, savoring the sense of peace that had been earned through struggle. The town had watched, judged, and finally recognized her worth. But here, among these people she had saved, and with the man who had silently supported her, Clara felt something even deeper, belonging. Ethan reached across the table, brushing her hand gently. Clara's fingers met his, a simple gesture filled with the weight of shared trials, mutual respect, and quiet, growing affection. No words were needed. Their connection had been forged in courage, tempered by hardship, and now rested in tender understanding. The children giggled, clattering silverware, and Clara laughed along with them, her voice light, unburdened. For the first time in her life, she felt fully herself, unashamed, unafraid, and cherished. The sun had climbed higher, golden light stretching across the ranch, glinting on dew-soaked grass and the wooden beams of the barn. Clara stood at the edge of the porch, hands resting lightly on the railing, watching the children run freely across the fields. Laughter carried on the wind, a sound she had longed to hear in her life, untainted by ridicule or scorn. Ethan approached quietly, boots crunching on the gravel. He stopped beside her, gaze following the children, then settling on Clara. For a moment, the world felt suspended, quiet, calm, and endless in its promise. He reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "Clara," he said, voice low, carrying weight and tenderness, "we've faced storms, and you've shown me the strength of your heart. I can't imagine facing the days ahead without you by my side." Clara felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a steady flame after years of cold judgment and shame. She met his eyes, seeing the same truth reflected there, admiration, respect, and something deeper, tender, and steadfast. "I've learned," she whispered, "that courage isn't about size or strength or what people expect. It's about standing when others falter, and never letting fear decide your worth." Ethan smiled softly, pressing his thumb against hers. "Then stand with me," he said simply, "stand with me as we face life together." Clara nodded, her voice catching slightly with emotion. "I will." The children came running, breathless and muddy from play, their eyes wide with anticipation. "Are we going on the ride today?" the boy asked eagerly. Clara laughed, brushing mud from his coat. "Yes," she said, "but first we celebrate the morning." The small group gathered near the barn, the animals grazing peacefully nearby. Clara and Ethan led the children, sharing quiet laughter, brushing hands over shoulders, and guiding them through the morning's simple pleasures. The ranch was alive with movement and life, a testament to endurance, courage, and care. Ethan paused, looking at Clara with a tender seriousness. "I want to make this official," he said softly. Will you be my wife?" Clara blinked, her heart swelling. She looked at the children, who watched with wide, hopeful eyes, then back at Ethan. "Yes," she whispered, voice steady despite tears pricking her eyes. "Yes, I will." The children cheered, clapping their hands and spinning in circles. Even the animals seemed to sense the joy, horses flicking their tails and birds calling from the trees. Clara laughed, a sound pure and free, unburdened by fear or shame. Ethan pulled her into a gentle embrace, holding her close as the morning sun warmed their faces. Clara rested her head against his chest, feeling a heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. This was home, this was belonging, this was love earned through trials, courage, and unyielding heart. The town beyond the ranch might have whispered, judged, and doubted, but here, in the warmth of family and newfound respect, Clara felt the truth settle deep inside her. She was seen, she was valued, and she was cherished. The sun climbed higher still, spilling golden light across the plains, the barn, the children, and the two of them standing together. Clara inhaled deeply, savoring the warmth, the laughter, the life they had fought for, and the love that had quietly taken root. Her gaze swept the horizon, the ranch, the children, Ethan, and the golden fields stretching beyond. They were her world now, and in that quiet, radiant moment, she understood something profound. Her journey had led her here, to belonging, to peace, to redemption. Clara smiled, lifting her face to the sun. "We've come so far," she whispered, voice full of gratitude and hope, "and the best is still ahead."